The different dimensions of parks is one of the things that makes baseball different from other sports. But what if players played in a neutralized setting across the board? Who gets better and who gets worse? Well, let's look at how this would change some of the best hitters of all time.
Totally Sportsesque. Major League.
The neutralized setting is found from Baseball Reference. What they do is adjust all of a player's seasons into a neutralized setting of 100 park factor, 90% of runs being earned, and teams scoring 688 runs a year. Park factor looks at how difficult it is for hitters to hit in certain parks, with the higher it being, the easier it is for hitters and tougher for pitchers. For example, last year the toughest park to hit in was T-Mobile Park, with a park factor of 92. Meanwhile, the best park for hitters was unsurprisingly Coors Field at 112, actually 16 less than what it was in 1995 at 128, the highest of all time. But with that said, let's look at the basic stats available to see how some of the best fared in the neutral setting. We can look at the players in the top 10 at different stats. For the top 10 home runs, we see 9 of the top 10 are part of the 600 home run club. But when we put these players in the neutralized setting, there are still 9 of the top 10 in the 600 home run club, but the names aren't all the same. Both Jim Thome and Sammy Sosa leave the 600 home run club, and Jim Thome leaves the top 10, but Reggie Jackson and Frank Robinson join the club and the top 10. Of the actual top 10, half see their numbers rise, with Pujols and Bonds adding 3 to remain in the 700 home run club, while Babe Ruth leaves the club with only 3 members, with the biggest riser and the home run king in this situation being Hank Aaron, who adds 32 home runs to his total to reach 787, making him the neutral home run king by 22 home runs. And after making a video about players in the most hitter-friendly park of all time being 95 Coors Field, Aaron being at the top isn't surprising, considering if his career took place in the 95 Coors setting, he would have hit 1,004 home runs. So as we'll see, no one gets better outside of normal situations than Hank Aaron. And we can see that in the top 10 for RBIs, perhaps the record he's most synonymous with now. And in this case, he keeps it by an even further margin, as he has an additional 133 RBIs. There's 4 players who knocked in at least 2,000 RBIs, but in this case, there's 6, with Willie Mays going from 11 to 6, with 97 additional RBIs to put himself just ahead of Barry Bonds, whose 3 additional home runs would apparently all be solo shots. And when we go to hits, we see the 2 members of the 4,000 hit club at the top, and after the neutralization, they are still the only members, but they switch spots like they did at 95 Coors Field, with Pete Rose gaining 155 hits, but that's not close to the 285 hits Ty Cobb gained, to put him back at the top. And what's different and not really surprising in comparison to the home run and RBI totals is that almost every player sees a rise in their total, with half of the top 10 adding at least 150 hits to their total. And there's an additional 4 if you include the top 15, with Eddie Collins, Willie Mays, and Nap LaJoy. In fact, the entire top 15 goes up, except for Derek Jeter. And there's something interesting about players who are close to the top of these lists who played most of their career with the Yankees. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Joe DiMaggio, and Derek Jeter all appear in the top 15 in a few major basic categories, but all drop in neutral settings. Perhaps it's the hitter-friendly old Yankee Stadium, along with Fenway Park being the second most common stadium they played in. But in this sense, perhaps it's the 688 average run scored that hurts, considering these 5 played with some of the greatest teams of all time, with 34 combined World Series between the 5 of them, and 688 runs scored is a decline for the teams these guys played with. And we see it again when looking at the top 10 in batting average with at least 2,000 games played. As expected, the top 10 consists of almost all early 20th century players, with Ty Cobb at the top, followed by Rogers Hornsby and Tris Speaker. And in the neutral setting, they remain at the top, and actually 7 of the top 10 remain. And the ones leaving the top 10 are Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Ted Williams, not surprising with what was previously mentioned. And when we look at one more stat in OPS, we see the usual suspects with Babe Ruth and the on-base leader in Ted Williams behind. In the neutral setting, just like average, the top 2 stayed the same, while Barry Bonds and Lou Gehrig switched spots. Just like average, we see almost everyone drop, especially early 20th century players, with those coming into the top 10 being a case of their OPS not dropping too much. And what's interesting here is that the one we see move up is the one and only Mike Trout. This could come as a result of a small increase in park factor, and as mentioned, playing on a good team can have a negative impact on stats in this setting. And if you didn't know, Mike Trout has played on a few teams that don't score too many runs, despite having generational players like Brett Phillips. So that could be an explanation. In the neutralized setting, we see players rise and fall in different categories for different reasons, but when looking at ballpark factors and a change in settings, the one who is always rising is Hank Aaron. As already seen, he tops the home run and RBI numbers in a neutral setting, and in the most hitter and pitcher friendly settings. and a big reason for this is Hank was consistently good on the road throughout his entire career. He is tied with Albert Pujols for the second most road home runs at 370, behind Barry Bonds, and at the time of his retirement, he was tied with Willie Mays and Harmon Killebrew for the second most 20-plus road home run seasons, behind Babe Ruth, who had 13. But of course, the league was smaller back then, which is why Ruth only played in 25 or more games in 9 stadiums, whereas Aaron played in 19, with the furthest west Ruth had to travel being St. Louis. In-season totals have always been used as somewhat of a mark against Aaron in his career, mainly the fact that 47 was the most home runs he ever hit in a season in 1971. Obviously that's not a terrible career high, but considering it's 755 home runs, you would just assume his peak was higher. But what is absolutely the most impressive part of Aaron's career is his consistency. From his age 21 season in 1955 to his age 40 season in 1974, Aaron hit at least 25 home runs with an OPS over 890 in all but one of those seasons. And in the neutralized setting, his numbers are even better. Aaron played a majority of his games in County Stadium in Milwaukee when the Braves played there, and that was a pitcher-friendly park that was large and contained fly balls, which is why in his 12 seasons there, he hit 28 more home runs on the road at 213 than he did in Milwaukee. But when we go to a neutralized setting, he would have hit an additional 24 home runs in these seasons, before him and the Braves moved to Atlanta to play in a more hitter-friendly park with the thinner air. Another stat he is tied for second in is 40 home run seasons at 8, with Harmon Killebrew, Alex Rodriguez, and Barry Bonds. And he's behind Babe Ruth's 11. But in the neutralized setting, Aaron is the only one of these 4 to have the total go up to 9, and Ruth joins him at 9 in this situation. And in a study by Bill James that looked at a situation where Aaron played all his games on the road, his peak numbers at least change a bit, with his age 37 season, then reaching a peak of 52 to join the 50 home run club, which ultimately would have resulted in 740 home runs, outpacing the 2 biggest challengers in this time in Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle. With a consistent peak that lasted for almost 2 decades and a clear ability to keep a Hall of Fame standard on the road, it's not too far-fetched to call Aaron the best hitter in a neutralized setting. Across the board, his already insane numbers rise in every category, not something seen with many of the best who ever played the game. And as already mentioned, with the average team runs scored per game possibly hurting some players, Aaron played with a number of great teams and a lot of good teams. And either way, you have to remember that no player in history is responsible for creating more runs than Hank Aaron. So, he's a team within himself. And going past all the neutralized stats, something that makes Aaron's career more impressive is in the years that would be seen as prime years for most in the late 20s and early 30s, Aaron had some of his best years in a time that benefited pitchers. With a widened strike zone as a result of the 1961 home run chase with Roger Maris, numbers dropped to 2021 levels. But Aaron continued to put up great numbers in his final years in Milwaukee and the first couple in Atlanta, with an ability to adjust towards favoring inside pitches. Everything in these situations is hypothetical, but interesting nonetheless to imagine a player playing their entire career somewhere else, or maybe entirely on the road like a gypsy. Aaron would be the only member of the 1,000 home run club in the 1995 Coors Field settings. Meanwhile, every pitcher's arm would explode in this situation, along with the constant mental breakdowns. And it's interesting to look at if everyone played in the exact same park with the same factors, meaning we would miss out on home runs like this.
Got a 2-out double in the first. Here's a high fly deep down the left field line. Dozier has sent it back, and